I spent the first 20 years of my life in a very small town in Western China. Right here is one of the poorest cities in one of the poorest provinces, the Guizhou province. Years ago, the city was even worse. I went to regular schools, no elite institutions, no foreign language based programs. My parents never paid for private English classes. No one around me spoke English. But here I am speaking English like this, so I think if I could do it, so can you. In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 conceptions about small-time English learners, and I'm going to be covering 3 practical tips that help me overcome these misconceptions and ultimately became fluent in English. So let's dive in. One of the biggest problems for English learners in a small town is that they treat English like just another school subject, like math, history, or physics. They believe that if they just memorize some rules, learn what the teachers tell them, and pass exams, they will automatically become good at English. But that's far from the truth. A textbook-focused study method can actually backfire because English is much more than just grammar exercises and vocabulary lists. Living in a big city makes learning English much easier because there is more exposure to information beyond what school offers. And to some extent, that's true. Big cities provide more diverse resources. But that doesn't mean that small town learners are at a disadvantage. What truly matters is vision. If you actively seek knowledge beyond textbooks, explore content in English, and develop curiosity, you can create your own learning environment no matter where you live. So don't limit yourself to just textbooks and exams. Be proactive, use your curiosity to explore, find interesting topics, and learn English as a tool to expand your world. Also, it is commonly believed that having native speakers around is essential for mastering English. And that's why some parents and schools spend a huge amount of money, sometimes 5 times the cost of a local teacher, to hire native English teachers from countries like the US, the UK, or Australia. But here is what they get wrong. The most important factor in learning English is the learner, not the teacher. If a student isn't motivated, no matter how much money is spent, it's like beating a dead horse. By the way, what exactly can a good native speaker teacher do? First of all, they can be someone that you can talk to. Second, they can tell you what authentic English sounds like. But in the 21st century, with the internet, you don't need a native speaker to achieve these things. If you can't find someone to speak with in person, you have other options. You can practice by talking to yourself, speaking with a local teacher with a decent English, or even using AI tools. And when it comes to authentic English, you already have access to native speakers everywhere. Videos, podcasts, movies, you name it. I know many people who can rattle off multiple ways to say the word tolerant, and they can easily fill in the blanks of complex grammar exercises on exams. They have memorized a lot of words, but if you ask them to speak or write in English, they freeze up. Why does this happen? Because simply studying English is not enough. In fact, it can be futile if you don't actively use this language. There is a well-known philosopher in China that says, knowledge and behavior must be united as one, proposed by Wang Yangming, this guy. There is an analogy in The Art of the Good Life by Rolf Dobley, who compares thinking to acting to a torch and a floodlight. Thinking is like a torch, focused and limited, but acting or applying the knowledge is like a floodlight. The author also discusses how moral philosophers, who are constantly engaged with ethical questions, might seem like better people, but moral philosophers don't actually behave any more morally than anyone else. It is the same with English. Just knowing words and grammar rules doesn't mean that you can actually use the language. As I said before, English is a tool, and a tool is useless if you don't use it right. Learning English is crucial, but the real progress comes when you start using it in your daily life. You need to actively use what you have learned, whether it is speaking, writing, or just having a conversation. Now, let me share some of the practical methods and tips that help me overcome these misconceptions, put English into use, and become a confident and fluent English user. One of the most useful and often overlooked tips for learning English is repetition. With so much content available today, it's very easy to get distracted by new videos, podcasts, or books. But just watching a new video or reading a new article doesn't make you fluent. You need to reinforce what you have learned through repetition. Actually, I didn't do this on purpose, and I didn't realize that I adopted a new tactic to learn English. I did it simply because of my personality. I tend to stick to one or two videos or movies that I find very interesting. I just kept watching them over and over again, not the whole thing, but certain parts. I remember watching Rush Hour and finding it hilarious when Detective Carter was talking to an old Chinese man. Their conversation was so funny, and I kept replaying it maybe more than 20 times. There were also some other YouTube videos that I find really interesting. And since YouTube was not available in China, I watched them on a domestic platform called Youku. I found them so interesting, so I downloaded them to my phone and watched them whenever I could. So you can see that the habit naturally led me on a journey to learn English. It just worked so well for me. That's why I highly recommend taking your time with the things that you truly enjoy. Declutter your mind from the overwhelming amount of information available online. You don't need all of it because according to Sturgeon's law, 90% or even 99% of content on the internet is probably irrelevant or useless to you. It is not about how many videos and lessons you go through. It is all about how well you can master what you have already learned, because less is more. By now, you probably get the idea. If you want to be fluent in English, find the content that you enjoy and repeat it over and over again until it becomes natural to you. But that brings up another question. How do I know if something truly interests me? Somebody says, I am just not an interesting person, or I don't really have a strong interest. But come on, everyone has something they enjoy. The key is to really get to know yourself and figure out what excites you and gives you energy. One simple way to discover your interests is to check your research history. What topics do you look up the most? You can also think about the things that you are willing to spend a lot of time and effort on without expecting any financial reward. Another fun trick is to imagine this. If you had to spend a year alone on an island and could only bring with you three things, what would they be? I actually borrowed this idea from How to Read a Book by Jay Adler and Charles Van Daren. For me, my three things might be my gaming PC or console because I'm a game person, my camera because I like to shoot things with it, and even maybe my yo-yo. Now that you have found something that you enjoy, the next step is to turn it into a habit. This is different from repetition, as I mentioned before. Repetition means doing something multiple times, but making it a habit means doing it consistently. You need to do it every day, but not just a huge burst of enthusiasm at first, only to quit later when you don't see any obvious results. Don't set overly ambitious goals. Instead, make your goal something like, I want to mimic a video, or I just want to start a simple conversation. Try listening to an English podcast during your commute, watching a short video a few times while eating. The key is to make it effortless, something you don't have to spend too much time on. Personally, I made a commitment to do something related to English every day, regardless of the duration of difficulty, even when I had some other important things to do or when I was studying engineering back in college. I can honestly say that it turned out to be very rewarding. So be patient. It might take a while, but over time, you will see natural, significant changes in yourself. I promise when something becomes a habit, you will be naturally motivated to do it. You will do it spontaneously without needing anyone to even force you to do it. Many people have made a fortune by selling the idea that learning English requires expensive courses, native teachers, or studying abroad, but that's a myth. The truth, you don't need a perfect environment to master English. You need the right mindset and smart methods. No matter where you live, mastering another language is always valuable and accessible. So don't let excuses or external conditions hold you back. Start today, stay consistent, and most importantly, enjoy the process. So yeah, that's the end of the video. I'm Sean English here. Remember, happy learning, and I will see you next video. Bye bye.